Good evening, everybody, and welcome to God's Answers to Your Questions, the Friday evening edition. If you are coming in on Facebook, you can submit questions to us on my page, CJ Marshall or Christian Edification Ministries. Or if you're coming in on YouTube, you can submit questions to us on my YouTube, CJ Marshall. We have a special program for you tonight, where we have Ed Smith and Nathan Morrison, who just got back from an Africa trip. But before I introduce them, they'll be presenting and talking to us about their work. I'll introduce Jim Rice. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing really good.
Good. And Nathan Morris is with us. How you doing,
I'm
Nathan?
doing well. Thank you.
Good. And then Ed Smith's also with us. How you doing, Ed?
I'm doing okay, everybody. How you all doing?
Good.
Really good.
So does somebody want to start us off with a word of prayer? Nathan, would you mind doing that?
Sure, we can go to God in prayer. Let's bow. Our Father in heaven, we bow our heads to you, thanking you for the many blessings that you provide. We're thankful for this avenue of technology that allows us to be together, though we're miles apart. We're thankful for this study and ask that you be with all those who may be submitting questions from honest and sincere and open hearts. And we ask you to be with all those involved with answering those questions, that we might do so from the scriptures and not from feelings or opinions. We're so thankful to you for your Son, for the fellowship we enjoy through him. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
So I'm just gonna turn it over to Ed and Nathan now as they give us a report, and maybe me and Jim can ask questions. And if we get any questions from the audience, I could field it in that way also.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead. Can you share the screen with us and put the slides up? Okay, Mzungu. So this is a word in Swahili that originally sort of means wanderer, but now it's applied to white people that don't seem to know what they're doing in Africa. And in some ways, that's pretty true of this trip. You know, every time you go to Africa, you're going to encounter something new. I've been there, at least 8 times now, and there's always something that sets me back, and I'm not ready for it. But that's sort of it's not necessarily a derogatory term. How would you explain it, Nathan? What is Mzungu to you?
We were told many times that it's not derogatory, it's more explanatory, that they felt there's another word in their language for white that means paper, and they felt like it's a dishonor to someone to call someone, a person, paper. And so hundreds of years ago, when the European settlers came over to Africa and they were lost, confused, wandering, they came up with a word that kind of encapsulated all of that, and it has stuck, meaning white man or white person. And it's a explanatory word. We are called Mzungu daily by just about everybody.
It got to where you start picking up on certain words, and please and thank you and hello are all pretty common, but you could hear somebody rattling something off, and all of a sudden you hear the word Mzungu in there, and you knew that you were being talked about.
Yeah.
So when you go over there, you just have to be used to standing out, and that actually works as an advantage, I think, when you have something worth sharing. And so it makes it easy to talk to people and explain who you are and why you're there. And I think we all did a pretty good job of connecting to people that way. Nate and Andrew both just, they owned it. This is who we are. This is our first time. And they just stepped up for it. So
when we heard people yell Mzungu or talk, Andrew and I would be like, Mzungu.
And I would carefully check my wallet to make sure it was still there. And so the first part of this trip is my trip to Ethiopia, and Nate really hasn't heard much about that part of the trip yet, just as we were talking in the car and things. But I went with Scott Owen. Brother Scott's been over there for many years, many trips, and his father Bob Owen was there before him. And this goes back to like the mid 1980s. And those of us that are old enough to remember, there were a lot of famines going on in Ethiopia at that time. And some of the men that happened to have a connection over there went over there and started preaching, and they've had great success. And what's really neat for me is to look back. I see the exciting things that happen in Africa over 5 or 6 years. This gave me a chance to see some of the things that have happened over the last 40 years. And so that was pretty amazing for me to be able to participate in that. And Lord willing, I'll be able to go back there again sometime. So as I go through these slides, going to Ethiopia should remind us of Acts chapter 8. One of the first people that we have a one-on-one conversion story about is the Ethiopian eunuch. And so he fits the narration in the sense that he's from Ethiopia. He also fits the sense for us in the sense that he's a eunuch. And I think as our generation continues to morally deteriorate, we're going to have more and more people that have transgender issues, sexual identity issues. Who am I? What did I do to myself, or what does somebody else do to me or allow me to do? And the fact of the matter is the gospel's for everyone, and it can overcome both those things that we cannot change about ourselves, like our race, but it can also overcome some of those other things that identify us as being different from other people. And so I think it's good for us to remember that the gospel is not a North American exclusive original. It was going throughout the Middle East and Africa before white men ever came to this continent. And in Ethiopia, they have their own tradition. They have a very strong Jewish tradition. There are a lot of Ethiopians that identify themselves as being Jewish. They believe that they're descendants of Israelites that came down to escape from different armies, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. And so there's a long community of Jewishness within Ethiopia, as well as their own brand of Christianity. And so just to give us a little reference to where we're at here, looking at the continent of Africa, this is going to concentrate on the eastern portion. And the first part is up north in Ethiopia. And the second part with Nate and Andrew will be further south in Tanzania. And so look at Ethiopia. The capital city is Addis Ababa. And CJ, you're going to have to help me out here. When I hover over the slides, does that obscure everything, or am I the only one that sees the slides, or does everybody else see that too?
No, I see it.
Okay. So I'll try to make sure I'm careful with the pointer and get through this. So Ethiopia has its own sort of Christian culture. And for me, that was different. Other African cultures that I've been to, there really is not a native African Christian culture. There's transplanted, missionary culture. So generally we're dealing with a lot of denominations, but they have their own denomination in Ethiopia. Some of the oldest Bible manuscripts are actually in Ethiopia, and these date back to about 350 AD. So, a couple hundred years after Jesus. And these are some of the oldest complete manuscripts we have. They're written in a language called Ge'ez, which is very similar to what they speak now called Amharic. And that's a unique language to Ethiopia. It's a tribal language that was made a national language, and it's got its own alphabet. It makes it really hard for me to go over there. There's no cognitive words for me. So I can have a hard time in other countries, but I can sort of tell, the name David is going to be some derivative of David or Davidi. But in Ethiopia, I can't even recognize the characters to sound it out to see where they're at. And so you see a lot of Ethiopian Orthodox churches. And when I say Orthodox, they'd be very similar in some ways to the ceremonies of the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox churches. They have their own priesthood. I believe the priests are allowed to marry. They have nuns that do their work as well. And so it's African model of what you might see in Rome or in Greece or some other countries. The culture and the landscape of Ethiopia is hugely different. The little shacks on the right, they're made out of what we call in architecture wattle and daub. Basically, it's limbs that are woven through upright stands and then covered over with an adobe clay and baked out in the sun. And not the prettiest and not the most comfortable living condition. And then in the cities, you have some nice high-rise apartments that are built by the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans, whoever they can get to build them cheaply, and a much more Western type of flavor to it. It's very much a nomadic kind of culture, and like all African cultures, they take advantage of whatever they can grab a ride on, because otherwise they're going to be walking everywhere. Saw a lot of donkey carts as people were taking things to markets. And so this just gives us a little flavor of what Ethiopia is like. This is a little shanty town outside the hotel, tarps thrown over pieces of corrugated metal. There are a few satellite dishes in here as well. And so there's that juxtaposition between technology and primitive housing arrangements. We were there in the rainy season. It was fairly mild. It was probably in the mid to upper 60s every day with these rain showers. Of course, Ethiopia, if you're a coffee lover, they have their own coffee ceremony. And I was treated to coffee just about every place we went. And it was very, very nice what they did and how they did it. And the food, you've got your standard mangoes and bananas and French fries and bread. Ethiopians make their own pancake kind of bread, and it's sort of a sourdough base. And then they dip into it. So it's very much like you read about in the New Testament, where Jesus takes a piece and he gives it to someone and they dip together. And so you would stand or sit around a dish like this with the different pancakes, and you tear a piece off and you dip in with everybody as you took something to eat. This happens to be a delicacy called kitfo. And kitfo is raw meat, usually recently processed, and mixed with hot spices and a hot melted butter. And it's one of their national dishes. So I had about 1 tablespoon serving size, and divided that into 4 bites. And Scott Owen, because he had been a friend of this couple for a long time, he took one for the team and ate the rest of it. So anyway, just a little bit of the culture. I worked with Scott Owen here on the right side, and our contact over there is Zerahun. Zerahun's been a Christian for a long time. He has very good English skills. So he works as a translator. He's also very trustworthy, and so we can use him for a lot of things, including paying for some of our bills and things up front. Here's the country of Ethiopia, and we started out from Addis Ababa and went south to Hosina on the first leg of our trip. And in Hosina, again, we've got this dichotomy: dirt roads, potholes, third world, but sort of wanting to improve itself. But we ran 2 classes of preachers. All told, we had about 220 preachers. And these guys came pretty much from that vicinity. We did some other classes, and there are other preachers that go over and do other classes. So we didn't have to really branch out too far and try to recruit people. Most of these guys came within an hour or 2 commute to the classes we did. Brother Scott taught on the book of Titus. I taught on types and shadows and Exodus, and Nate got an earful of that while we were in Tanzania. But some of these guys represent large congregations. One man is a preacher for a congregation of 900 people. Now,
Whoa.
he explained to us that it's a nomadic village, and so they usually only have about 300 present. He said, but a couple times a year, everybody comes home, and they'll have to have 3 consecutive services to have everybody, but they all consider themselves part of the same church.
That's super surprising when you consider where me and Jim are from.
Yeah.
It is, and if you listen to some of the reports and things, even among the denominations, they say that the response to the gospel in Africa, in particular, is astonishing right now. And so, if you consider these guys represent, 60 to not 900, but maybe 200 members, we're talking 10 to 60,000 Christians represented among those preachers within a 2-hour radius.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that's the kingdom, guys. That's what's going on, and we may not see it in our backyard, but it's happening in other places. So here's a picture of all. I think we had 210 that day. There were some that couldn't stay for the whole thing, so we had 220 total. But usually roughly between 208 and 210 were there with us. And we know that because some of the guys that had the resources were helping to fund some of the transportation among these guys. And so they had to count who was there and how far they came. Okay. That was the end of my first week there. Then we went to one of the congregations where we worshiped. There are some unique things about worship. Sometimes when I lead a prayer, I'll just take a knee. A friend of mine, Clarence Johnson, used to do that. And then somewhere I picked it up. Instead of standing over everybody, I sort of get down. And I did that. And I heard a big rustling. And all these people had turned around and taken a knee. They'd all decided to kneel since that's what the leader was doing. And that's not unusual within their Christian context. This is what they do in their Orthodox churches. This is what the Roman Catholics do. So it's just part of what they do. When they pray together, they will pray a single thought in a sentence and stop, and everybody will say amen. And so that will continue on, and they all seem to know, by the inflection of the voice or whatever, here's the end of the thought, time to say amen. And so instead of having 2 or 3 at the end of the prayer, they all say it together throughout the course of the prayer. Also, their songs are very different. A lot of the other African countries have heavy influences from Churches of Christ, but in Ethiopia, they have a lot of their own songs, and so you don't even recognize the melody in many cases or how they're being sung. Then we went to the east to Awassa, which they call the Lake District, which sort of reminds me of this area. We had a smaller group, but again, the church here has only been going for about 20 years. And so in 20 years' time, we have 130 preachers. Congregations are generally smaller, but they probably represent up to 9,000 Christians within that same general area. So we're not even talking countrywide. We're talking about a 4 or 5 hour drive away. And here's another huge pocket. And these are only 2. Scott went to a third while I was in Tanzania. And Randy Harshberger and others are in Ethiopia doing this on a regular basis as well. So this is worthwhile in terms of the effort and the work involved. There are a lot of souls that are ready for the gospel there. I put this picture up here in the corner just because they do have traffic lights. They don't necessarily use them. But if you want to know if they have traffic lights in Africa, they do happen to have traffic lights. So then we returned home to Addis Ababa. I got to visit with Zerahun and his family, and then they took me to the airport, and that's where I flew down to meet Nate. And we went on the long, rough road to Kilolo, and that's not our description. That's the Africans' description of it. So you can imagine that it was a pretty rough road. Not the roughest I've been on, but we met at the airport and we went out to work with a small congregation in a small area called Kilolo. And if you try to look it up, you might get like a Kilolo region on Google, but as far as an actual spot, I think there's a hospital or medical clinic, and that's pretty much it. We met together. We had to cram ourselves into this airplane, and Zubairi, our translator and guide, he's such a big guy, they wouldn't let him walk down the aisle of the airplane. As you can tell, there's not much room between the seats. And so they had to put him through the front door. He's a former, let me go back a slide, show you who I'm talking about here. This is, Zubairi is taking the picture. This is him over on this side. He's a former professional goalkeeper for a soccer team in Tanzania. So he's a pretty big guy. And then we get to the Iringa airport, and there's not a whole lot there. So, and I think I had some transitions that didn't come through on this slide. I had some pictures of looking over the pilot's shoulder and seeing the landing strip and some other things coming in. But this is Iringa. This is where we stayed. And this is Kilolo District. And here's the little hospital down here. I think, Nate, if I've got this right, we went this branch. We never passed the hospital. So I think we took this branch. And the church is right in here somewhere.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing a hospital.
Yeah, we didn't go very far to get onto the paved road, which I think is the rest of this.
I don't think we can see a coaster. At least I can't.
Oh, okay. Well, down in the corner of that red dot is close to where the church building is. I think we were on the other little white road there instead of the red where the red dot's at. But we were quite a ways out. It's about an hour, I think, it took us to get out there.
Yeah, it was always an hour ride.
And this is what we found, not a congregation of 900 people here. But when you appreciate what these people go through and the struggles that they have, you remember the church is not the outside, it's what's inside. And so there's a small congregation. There are some people that were there that Sunday. It was our last Sunday with them. One of the families was moving away, so they were a little bit torn up and emotional about losing that family. But there's some good people there and some non-Christians. So this woman came, and Nate, I just found the pictures where she gave me the eggs. I'd sort of forgotten about that.
I had one of those in my slideshow.
Yeah. She wanted to give us something for our work, and she wanted to know why we weren't taking a collection up on Friday and Saturday. We explained to her that's not why we're there, that we would, be there Sunday and the saints would have their own collection on Sunday. Well, she came on Sunday. I don't think that was her original plan. And she brought 4 eggs to give to us as her appreciation.
The woman he's talking about is on my left. She's right up against me on my left side. So.
She's with the red one of the two with the red head wrap.
Yeah.
And the person to Nate's right is our driver. He was Lutheran, and he sat in on most all the classes. Had a lot of questions. They would ask for a question and answer session. So the questions were coming from these two, and I think there was one other from the community that was visiting. And so they're small, but they're doing their work and they're finding good hearts. Nate, did you want to add anything else on here?
Just that so without a pointer, it's going to be difficult, except for the guy next to you. He's on your left. That's Charles. He's the former preacher that's leaving for another work. And the man right behind the lady with the red head wrap next to me, that is Brother John. He's the preacher that has taken over for that congregation. So we're able to encourage both of those men, the one that's going to start a new work and the one who is staying behind it to keep this work going.
Yeah, I went ahead there because I thought I had a picture of Charles, and it looks like I forgot to get it inserted. Either that or it's in a transition and stuck in Netherlands. So from there, we flew back to Dar es Salaam, and we often try and connect with the hotel staff people. Usually they have good English. Many times they're interested in what we're doing. And Nate and Andrew and I always try to leave a good impression with these people. We're not the obnoxious tourists that they have to put up with from time to time, but we're there to care about them. And so these ladies clued in. They asked Nate and Andrew if they could have some Bibles, which we're happy to provide for them. So most of the hotel staff had turned over since my last trip a year ago. So I don't know if I'll get a chance to follow up with them next year, but maybe I will, or maybe Nate will, or maybe Andrew will, or one of us. Hopefully that's going to be the plan.
Are those Bibles translated into Swahili?
Yeah, these are Swahili Bibles, and as far as we can tell, they're reasonably good translations. It's a little hard sometimes to get good translations because they're often done through English into that native language rather than from Greek. But these seem to be a little bit better. It looks like we lost Jim there.
Yep.
Yeah,
The young lady on the right of the picture, she said she was Muslim and she didn't know if she could have a Bible, and we said, sure, you can have a Bible. And her friend, she said it was Lutheran, and she didn't have a Bible, so we made sure both of them had one.
Yep. The Muslims often will hold the Quran in a high esteem, and they will often have it wrapped even in a box or a cloth when they put it away. And, it's just sort of a big deal when you have one and you bring it out and you read it. And our approach with Bibles is much less philosophical. It's like, here's a tool. You need to read this. And if you have any questions about it, we'll be happy to help you understand what you're reading.
Yeah, and Zuberi was quick to do that. He had little invitation brochures to his congregation in Wanambaya, and he gave them to them so they had his contact information. So if they had questions, they can get a hold of Zuberi, the local preacher there.
Oh, I want to explain radical orators. This is one of the terms that one of the preachers applied to us. And I think it was because we didn't quite fit the mold of what he was used to dealing with in terms of Church of Christ preachers. And so we were radical, and we teach church independence and autonomy, and that seems to be a radical concept to him. And so he labeled us as radical orators.
Yeah, that's the guy there.
Yeah, it was actually this brother Duncan here. Yeah, he was trying to get us to support him, and I think the poor guy had been taken advantage of with somebody's scam, and they were trying to see if this guy could get some money out of the Mzungu. We explained to him as kindly as we could that what he was doing was probably very illegal and probably not honest at all. And so he made a promise to me after I got home that he was not going to use that material anymore. And he's very upset with the people that told him that this is a good way to get money. So, good heart, just wrong directions. So back in Dar es Salaam, we went to Kizuiani, and this is a congregation where the preacher has always opened the doors and invited us to come in and teach. He left the schools of preaching that are run by the institutional churches and is training young men on his own. And he has a wonderful reputation. He's got a great Bible knowledge, a lot of respect. And Zubairi is one that trained with him and is now out doing his own work. And he has others with him. Some of them go on and some of them do other things, but he's very diligent in trying to teach them. I'll show you a picture of Diego in a little bit, but he has come out of Islam, and he's written several booklets and things on converting people from Islam. So he's got a lot of resources that we need to get into some English translations. So here's Nate and Andrew working with Zubairi, and a picture from the back of the group. So it was a pretty good sized group. Now, this is the other Charles, and this one is a personal friend of mine, Charles Mwango. I met him the first time I went over there. He came to our classes. He had very good questions and wanted to know about what we were teaching and things. At that time, he was involved with the Bible school, and the institutional people, and he was preaching at the large congregation that had 220 people, and the school was providing his support for him. Shortly after I left, he had his wife went into labor, lost the baby, lost the wife as well, and he needed some funds because he had a double funeral that he never expected to have to pay for. He asked the people that were doling out the money from the U.S. if he could have some additional funds for the funeral, and they said, no, we've already given you your salary for the month. And in Muslim countries, they bury the body usually within 48 hours. And so you don't have a lot of time to make plans and arrange things. And so, Jim, you may remember this. You may have helped out on this one, but I put out an appeal for Charles and the need for the funeral. And within hours, I had enough money not only for the funeral, but enough left over for his daughters to go visit their grandparents in their home village and spend some time with family after the funeral. And Charles stopped preaching for the time being. He was not very pleased with the response he got from the institutional people. And he needed to figure out what he's going to do, how he's going to provide for his family and take care of his two girls. He remarried a Christian. She was converted from Islam, and Zubair, I had introduced her. I helped Charles pay the bride price for her. And he's been back to the classes, even though he's been working. He takes the time off to come back to the classes. His new wife on this last trip was given to bed rest, and she had spent 3 months in bed rest, well, 2.5 months in bed rest. And finally, the doctors operated this last week, and it was touch and go for her for a while, even up until today. And he sent me a message this morning telling me that she and the baby had both been discharged from the hospital. So he came very close to losing a second wife this time around.
Wow.
But he now has a baby boy, and mom and baby are doing fine. So we went to a congregation that was new for me. Andrew had been here before. But I had not been to this particular group yet. And they've got a lot of ambition. They've got a pretty good site, I think, and they've got the foundations laid for our large building. For the time being, they're still in this kind of a shack, but they're hoping they can get enough money to finish the building, and they've got plans, and it's been approved by the district and by the architect and everything. So I don't know how long it'll take them, but they're not in any rush. God provides as He will. The man smiling with me up there on the left side is a preacher, Nicholas, from another congregation that I talked about last year, where we did some street evangelism together, which is a real hoot. We didn't get to do that with Nate this year, but going out on the street and just sharing the gospel is really exciting when you find people that want to talk to you about it. So I know we've got a limited amount of time. Nate, if you have something, just jump in here. This is Diego here with me and his son. Diego is a small man in stature, but he's huge in spirit and character. And so he has been a driving force among the churches of Christ. He has distanced himself on a good basis from the schools of preaching, and he doesn't see that pattern. And so he is encouraging us to come and continue to teach autonomy and independence among the congregations. Then we went to Zubair's church. He now has about 23, although we had 21 people there present this time. And that
41.
church is...
Yeah, it was 41. It was 41. It was a big crowd.
Okay. Well, yes, the members is about 21, but we had 41 with all the visitors there, including some from the community. But this is a congregation that started less than a year ago. And so, when you're up in Michigan and you've been in a congregation that's been there for 30 years and you're back down to 20 people, it's good to remember that there are new congregations starting up in other places that are already to 20. The ladies down here, by the way, in the bottom of the slide, were getting together to talk about evangelism. They feel like they need to have a bigger role themselves as individuals, teaching their neighbors And so they're getting together every other week now to have evangelism classes and encourage each other. And they're desperate because none of them have really taught classes on it before. And so they're just sharing their ideas at this point. And then we had to do a few sightseeing things and take in some of the sights. So we got Nate down there to the Indian Ocean, and he got his feet wet down there. And we went to the fish market and saw all the goods that were stored up there. The fella up in the upper left is sorting Scotch bonnet peppers. They're one of the hottest peppers around, and he's doing it barehanded, touching everything, and no problem at this point. And then down in the corner, there were some Maasai people that were dressed up in their traditional costume, and so of course we got a chance to stand with them. The Maasai are very tribal, very proud kind of people, and so they stand out. And then you got to just the food, and so Nate, you want to tell them what you guys are trying to eat there?
So we came to this market, and Brother Ed, he tried. He told us he'd been there. This was his third time, and he said every time he only gets the Coke. So Zubairi got a dish that had chicken and cow on a stick, cuckoo and cow they called it. Our driver, Amy Lee, got what I typically got. He got French fries and chicken. They called it chips and cuckoo. Well, Andrew and I both ordered drinks. They didn't have diet, so I got water. Andrew had a Coke, as you can see. And when the food came out, Zubairi's chicken on a stick looked really good. It looked like, if you can imagine, remember Asian chicken, like the chicken and broccoli, that coloration of the chicken. That's what Zubairi's looked like. So Andrew and I looked at each other and we said, we want that. So I ordered one. Andrew ordered the chicken and the cow. He did exactly what Zubairi did. Ed shook his head and said, I got to get a picture of this. And he says, I'm going to get the before and after. So when it arrived, it did not look the same as Zubairi's. For one, they were smaller pieces of chicken on our sticks. Andrew had really tiny pieces of cow, and they were darker. I have a cumin allergy, so I was pretty careful up to this point. I just bit into it, and it was my only cumin scare. For one, it was chicken liver, and it was spicy. So I didn't know what I just bit into, other than these were organs on a stick, we found out. I have a tell. I can rub whatever I think I'm allergic to on my arm and time it. In 3 minutes, I'll know. So I did that. During that 3 minutes while I'm timing it, find out if I'm going to need an EpiPen. Andrew and I were pulling the meat apart. It was undercooked. The meat at the very base of the stick was unidentifiable. It looked like what we guessed was the intestines. When we pulled the meat apart, it was this pink goo that kind of spread out. Not appetizing at all. We discovered chicken livers, chicken hearts, the gizzard, and this unidentifiable piece. Andrew tried the beef, and it was also the organs. He was able to identify at least the liver. So we didn't eat it. When my 3 minutes was up and I did not get cumin, the driver found it all amusing, me rubbing it on my arm and everything. And his plate was empty by that time. So I just gestured at my plate, and he took it and finished it. And Andrew gave his to Zubairi, and they ate. And we learned Ed's lesson: get Coke or water at that little market.
So sometimes you have to be careful. The dish on the left is just sort of a traditional dish of greens and I think rice. Even the greens, if they're cooked, they're generally edible, but you still have to be careful. You have to make sure that they're well cooked, and you're not going to pick something up. I made that mistake before. I think everybody suffered a little bit of something this trip, and you just have to be careful with what you get. So this is my last slide, I think. On the way home, I got the privilege of spending hours in the Addis Ababa airport, and I tried to save about $300 or $400, and it messed me up big time because Addis Ababa, if you come into the airport, you have to have proof of a negative COVID test results in order to get into the airport. But you can stay in transit without it. Well, I didn't want to go through all that hassle of trying to do that in Africa, so I just stayed in the airport, and I stayed there for about 13 hours. And in the meantime, this fellow came over and sat down next to me, showed me his identification, and said that he only made about $60 a week. And I said, "It sounds like you need a new job." And he said, "Well, I'm asking you for a donation." I said, "Well, for the airport, do I get a receipt?" And I found out that's one of my best lines is to ask, "Am I going to get a receipt?" Because then they get a little bit nervous because they know that that they're trying to shake you down. And so he said, "No, no, no, no receipt for myself."
Oh,
And
he was an airport employee asking you for asking for money.
he was an airport security.
Oh,
So, he could have filed some false charges against me. He could have held me for questioning and made me miss my connections and my flights. And, he could have messed me up really bad. He kept watching me, and he wasn't sure if I had gotten a picture or not. But I knew that my 12-hour stay is going to be longer than his 8-hour day. And so after he finished his shift, I took the picture around. I showed it to a couple of people, told them what had happened. They were incensed. The Ethiopians, they were just appalled that this had happened. But to me, it's a security risk. I don't want a security guard that will take money for anything.
uh-huh.
And so they took me to one of the supervisors. I showed them the picture. I said, "Do you know this man?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "This is what he did." And they were shocked. I said, "You can see it all. You have security cameras. Do you have footage?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, you don't need my cell phone. You can verify it yourself and decide. But that man's a danger to the airports and everybody here." So every trip, there's something memorable. And no two trips are exactly the same. And so as we preach the gospel, we're going to meet all kinds of people. Hopefully we'll meet them in our own neighborhoods, but if we don't, there are people in other places that would like to hear the gospel. So that's it. CJ, I kept you under 45 minutes, and we got time for questions or comments if anybody wants to say something, or for Nate to add some more to from his perspective.
This was my first trip ever, so everything was new for me.
Well, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say it sounds like a really fantastic trip. How long did you stay over there? A couple weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah, my part was 3 weeks because I did the week in Ethiopia first, and then we did 2 weeks in Tanzania. I'd like to be a lot busier. In Ethiopia, we were very busy. We had classes basically from about 9, well, they say 9, so it's 9:30 or so, until about 4. And so those are busy days of teaching for me, and did a lot of question and answer sessions. Tanzania was very different. Iringa was very rural. We had a lot of good reception there and response there. In the cities, it's like cities, other places, people are busy. They can't always schedule things the way they want them to. We had good attendance, but I'd still like to be a little busier over there. I think we can find more people.
Good. Well, I appreciate you guys taking time out of your Friday night to be on with us. Anything else to add, guys?
That's all for me. I got to do all the talking.
Anything? What was that, Nathan?
I said thank you for the invite. It was nice to be here.
You're welcome. It was nice to have you, and you're welcome every time. Anytime. Well, that's about all the time that we have for this week. Thank you all for being with us, and again, I want to thank Ed and Nathan for agreeing to be on. Good presentation. A lot of good work going on other places that are not our own backyard, and we definitely need to be aware of what's going on, and if we can help out, let's see if we can help out. But this is our contact information, and that doesn't work very well. This is our contact information. Well, that's our contact information on on Facebook. You can contact us on God's Answers to Your Questions or on YouTube on CJ Marshall. But until next week, thank you all for tuning in and say bye bye to the two people creeping up. Thank you all. Thank you all. And we'll see you all next week.
All right. God bless. Bye bye.
Bye, Jim.